This is a very special game. Special in an intangible way. It's hard for me to describe, but I'm gonna try and do it anyways. I think different people are gonna come away from playing this game with very different takeaways. Some will walk away from it having felt something deep and profound, meaningfully affecting them in ways like no other game has before. And others might walk away and write it off as boring or, dare I say, uninspired. Both of these takes are okay. Regardless of where you sit on this spectrum, there's one thing that I think anyone who has spent as little as 5 minutes with this game can agree on. It's that Hyper Light Drifter is art. Now, this isn't your typical for fun video game. It's not that it isn't a fun game per se, it's just that it being a fun game is not necessarily the primary focus. Instead, I think the focus is on creating a unique experience for the player and telling a story that is very open to interpretation. It's kind of like Journey or Abzu if you've ever had the pleasure of playing either of those. It's not just a game to be beaten and put on a shelf to collect dust. It's an experience that you remember and reflect on days, months, maybe even years later. Hell, maybe you even get a tattoo. Also, it just happens to be fun, so yeah, it's a win-win. With all that said, let's dive in and see what makes Hyper Light Drifter so special. First off, Hyper Light Drifter is a beautiful game with gorgeous pixel art unlike anything I've seen before. Sure, civilization is in ruins and there are these dark and mysterious undertones, but nature has taken over and reclaimed everything, making the desolate cityscape that we explore oddly beautiful. The game has this sort of vibrant pastel color palette that I know doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but I don't know how else to describe it. And this color palette gives the world its own unique identity. The environments are full of details, oozing with a retro 8-bit or 16-bit charm, and holy moly, the sprite animations are so freaking good. Just look at this furry otter dude hanging out in town. He's chillin', making the best of a bad situation. Or how about this little skeleton serenading us with his 6-string? Hell, even our main character, the Drifter, has tons of personality. I suppose I would hope so. His movements and attacks look great. He's got this sweet sword animation he does whenever he clears a challenging group of enemies, and he even has this perfectly fitting idle animation where he just sits down on the ground and appreciates the beauty surrounding him. There's just so much character in everything we see, and I love it. Another really interesting choice that the creators over at Heart Machine, the studio behind this game, decided to go for was to nearly completely exclude the game of text or dialogue. Everything is conveyed through images with the exception of some stone monument thingy for lore buffs out there, but I'm not going to be getting into that. Characters you can interact with don't actually talk to you. Instead, a series of images pop up for you to interpret on your own. This adds to the world's mystique. Nothing is spoon-fed, and it allows you to try and piece things together yourself to create your own understanding of what may have transpired in the past for the world to end up in its current state of chaos and ruin. Great works of art often let the observer fill in the blanks, and Hyper Light Drifter excels at it. Sure, some people will not like that. They want to know exactly where to go and what to do from a gameplay perspective. You know who you are. And while I can understand and might even agree if things were actually super complex and hard to figure out, but I think in Hyper Light Drifter's case, things are simple and intuitive enough that if you're willing to put in the time to just explore, things will start to make sense to you after a little while. It's not just the visuals and the lack of text that make this game so special though. I think what really pushes Hyper Light Drifter into the games as art category is that the music and sound design are phenomenal. The music is at the same time atmospheric, haunting, beautiful, and incredibly driven, and it perfectly complements the game's mood and setting. I haven't really mentioned it yet, but this game takes place in a sci-fi world where technology was once far ahead of our own, but most of it was lost in a cataclysmic event ages ago. This is where the incredibly dark and bit-crushed to hell synth pads are a perfect match for this world. Disaster Piece is a freaking musical genius, and this soundtrack is just mind-blowingly good. It instantly reminded me of the original Blade Runner score with its crazy long drones and just really wide sounds. On the sound design side of the oral experience, I just want to point out something that is so subtle. I bet you wouldn't even notice it if I didn't say anything, but I think it's what makes the combat satisfying. Here, listen. Did you hear it? No? Well, try again. It's these tiny, micro, squishy sounds of the blood spraying out of these enemies whenever they get hit. Add in the little impact noise and dude, it's so good. It's something so minor, but when it's done right, it single-handedly makes the combat feel meaty and impactful. I highly recommend you guys check out this GDC talk with Disaster Piece and Heart Machine's sound designer Akash Thakkar for more information on how they pulled it all off. I'll leave a link to it below the like button. There were so many moments in the game where I just sat down and listened to the music and the ambient noises and got lost in the serenity of it all before resuming my trek into uncharted territory. I should also mention that the music reacts and changes based on what is happening in-game seamlessly. This is especially noticeable during combat, where the music swells rhythmically and drowns out even the combat sound effects at times, which is something I don't think I've seen done much in video games, yet film and TV do it all the time to heighten dramatic effect in an action scene. It really makes the action hit hard here. Likewise, the more peaceful exploration moments often have these really ambient soundscapes that bring life to the rooms beyond just the pretty animations and the art. I mean, just look and, more importantly, listen to this beautiful audioscape by the husk of a long-defeated titan in the flooded region. I really love the juxtaposition of the quieter rooms with those action-packed ones, just from a musical standpoint. Another thing that really stood out to me after playing the game for a few hours is that the pacing is basically perfect. You're free to explore the world at your own pace, but the game constantly switches between fast-paced combat encounters and more contemplative moments of exploration and world building. This happens both in and out of dungeons, which you're constantly making your way through in order to ultimately complete your objective. Here's my recommendation. If you made it this far into the video and you still haven't played the game yet, I highly recommend you give it a shot. Play it in the dark, with headphones, and most importantly, when you're in the right state of mind. Don't just rush through it. Play it at your own pace and let the experience wash over you. Then come back and watch the rest. From this point onwards, there are going to be spoilers, kind of. I mean, I still don't really have a complete grasp on what's going on in this game, but honestly, like lots of incredible traditional art, I kind of think that's part of the point. In Hyper Light Drifter, you play as the Drifter, a mysterious blue guy, I don't know if he's an animal like the rest of the characters actually, who has a serious affliction causing him to spit out blood and have twisted, nightmarish visions of a corrupt shadow entity killing him whenever you complete a story beat. This is really important and probably the most interesting thing about this entire game. The Drifter's affliction that we experience and see getting worse and worse as the game progresses is an allegory for the original game creator Alex Preston's congenital heart disease he's lived with his entire life. To put it in layman's terms, he was born with an incomplete heart and has had several surgeries throughout his life, always living with the constant knowledge that today could be his last. This whole game is a tribute to his experiences growing up with this condition and his love of video games. It comes from a place of passion, and I think it really shows. When I found out about this about halfway through playing the game, while doing some light research for this very video, it just added a whole new level of meaning to the experience. If you want to learn more about it, check out NoClip's excellent documentary following the development of Hyper Light Breaker, where Alex himself explains his inspiration for this game. Link in the description. The game opens up with a gorgeous cutscene introducing us to our character as well as the world. There's this really cool shot of the Drifter standing on a cliff in front of some absolutely enormous, terrifying titans. Not at all unlike those you might be familiar with in Attack on Titan or the giants from Miyazaki's film Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. Without much of an explanation, in that same exact shot, something big happens and the titans are defeated and start melting away, which I think serves as a nice hook to get you interested in this world. Like, what exactly is going on here? You wake up by a fire during a crazy looking storm, and you're accompanied by a small, flying robot that acts as your interpreter. It interacts with things in the world for you, providing you with visual clues and information throughout your adventure. The game is an isometric action-adventure game with fast-paced combat, easily inspired by the likes of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and apparently Diablo. Although I'm gonna be honest, I don't really see that connection that much beyond the isometric perspective, I suppose, and I have played a ton of Diablo and Diablo-inspired games, like a lot. The first couple minutes of the game serve as a tutorial area for you to learn the basic controls. I tried playing on both controller and keyboard and mouse, and ultimately went for controller, which is supposedly the superior scheme, though it's definitely playable with either. There's a central hub town which you first spot from afar off a cliff, and it was one of those moments that really made me realize, okay, this game is trying to do something very special here. This is not just a game you grind out to pass the time, let me pay attention. Not long after that, the Drifter passes out and gets rescued by another mysterious caped warrior. Not unlike yourself, you wake up in a bed, in town, and just like that, the world is open for exploration. There are 3 very distinct regions you can explore in any order: north, east, and west. The southern path is blocked off for now. If there's an intended direction that the devs wanted you to start with, I didn't notice it and ended up going north for no particular reason. The goal of the game isn't entirely clear at first, but as you explore your chosen region, you eventually realize that you need to kill some dangerous bosses and acquire 4 modules, which are most definitely not Triforce references, in each region to erect these giant pillars and activate something back in town. Thankfully, while going about, you'll naturally encounter that same warrior who rescued you earlier, and he'll point out some of the modules for you on your little map, giving you some sense of direction. I think the map is really cute, and while not super detailed, it's good enough to help you figure out if you're heading in the right direction, which is pretty helpful because, oh man, I would have been so lost if there wasn't a map, especially in the many underground sections the game has. Oh, also, there are these warp points that you can find that make traveling between the different regions a lot quicker, very convenient. While you're out adventuring, exploration is heavily encouraged. There are plenty of secret chests, hiding in hard-to-find rooms or behind difficult challenges that reward you with important gear bits, which you can turn in for upgrades back at the base. Certain doors require specific numbers of modules in order to open them, leading to new areas and extra modules that you wouldn't have found otherwise. There are also hidden keys, monoliths for you to decipher, and to my surprise, outfits to collect, not to mention the environments themselves are absolutely stunning. Combat is fast-paced and frenetic and requires you to position yourself carefully and attack with intent. While it is pretty much an action RPG, it's definitely not a button masher. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say it heavily punishes button mashing, which is something I absolutely struggled with early on. Every swing of your sword needs to be deliberate, since you'll be locked into the animation once you initiate it, and if you're not playing carefully, you will get hit in response for being out of position. And this happened to me like a lot. Same goes for using your dashes poorly, as well as firing your gun. Now on that last point, there is actually a sort of bug/feature that was discovered and purposefully kept in the game because it kind of made it more fun. I'm of course talking about plinking. Plinking is a neat little trick you can use to essentially double your damage when performed correctly. Basically, it's as easy as firing your pistol and then immediately swinging your sword, cancelling the gun firing animation early and letting you pull off 2 hits instead of 1 with just 1 motion. Naturally, this only works when you're in melee range. Firing your pistol and following up with a melee attack won't do you no good if there's nobody for your sword to hit. Also, another great benefit of plinking is that because your pistol shot connects first, it consumes ammo. However, the follow-up melee attack will instantly recharge the ammo as long as it connects. So if done properly, you'll basically end up with infinite ammo, which is pretty handy. This can be done with other guns too, like the shotgun, but because the shotgun has a long cooldown in between shots, there are additional steps required, like switching back and forth from another weapon in between shots, making it pretty technical and not quite as easy to pull off in the middle of combat. Also, it'll only work on tougher enemies with lots of HP, since most common enemies will die in one hit of whatever other gun you use besides the pistol, rendering the melee swing portion of plinking pretty much useless. Also yeah, I don't think I mentioned the fact that there are other guns besides the pistol yet. There are 6 in total, although I've only gotten 4. One of them I know you get by collecting all of the modules in one of the regions, but the other one I'm really not sure, to be completely honest, and that's okay. I've still got some exploration to do. My favorite of the ones I've unlocked has to be the shotgun. Being in close range and firing that sucker does a boatload of damage and can hit groups of enemies, which feels wonderful. As far as the RPG side of things goes, you've got access to a handful of unlockable skills, which cost gear bits to unlock back at certain NPCs in town. The skills I found to be the most useful during my playthrough were the chain dash, the ability to deflect projectiles with my melee attacks, and the ability to cancel out projectiles altogether while dashing. Once I had unlocked all 3 of those, I started to have a whole lot more fun in combat with all of the different enemies this game has to offer. Speaking of which, there's a nice variety of enemies that you'll run into on your travels, and each region has its own tribe of foes to battle. Up in the northern region, it's a group of spellcaster birds, helmed by a giant bird shaman boss who ended up being one of my favorite fights in the game. It required pretty precise movement to dodge all of the fun AoEs, which reminded me of some of my favorite bosses in MMOs. A lot of the bosses are actually like this. To the east, it's a group of Teenage Mutant Ninja Toads, and their leader is this giant otter-eating toad guy. He's a tough fight and gave me a really hard time until I accidentally discovered some cheese that made him fall over. It was pretty unexpected, but kind of funny. To the west, it's a tribe of warrior raccoons. They're pretty deadly on their own, but their leader wrecked me with his super cool samurai-looking moves. And to the south is where things get particularly interesting. Instead of fighting a tribe of animals, it seems like the Drifter has to fight through a collection of horribly mutated monsters, perhaps the results of some experiments gone wrong a long time ago. To be quite frank, none of the regular enemies we encounter stood out to me from a gameplay perspective. Most of the challenge comes from the room layouts and composition of different enemies as opposed to just the enemies themselves. The way I see it though, there's nothing wrong with that. None of the fights felt totally unfair, and every time I died, I knew it was my own fault. Or at least mostly. If I had one criticism of the game, it would have to be the dashing mechanic. In most cases, dashing is totally fine. However, it's got some quirks that sometimes cause it to behave in, let's just say, less than ideal ways. Rather than the dash traveling a fixed distance in the exact direction you're pushing your analog stick, the game instead tries to figure out what it is you're trying to dash to and snaps over to that. This can make the platforming sections of the game smoother, since your dash will automatically snap over to the nearest platform you're dashing towards, but it also just doesn't go where you want it to sometimes, especially in the heat of combat. The number of times I died because I fell off of a platform when just trying to dash out of harm's way is way more than I'd care to admit. I can say that I've gotten better at avoiding these unnecessary deaths, but never have I felt like I have absolute control over my dashing, which definitely feels strange. I'd also like to make a special note on chain dashing here, which is an upgrade you can unlock. This is super fun. I love that if you time it properly and have great control of your movement, you could just chain dash forever. Well, at least inside this little dash circuit which automatically refills your stamina. Chain dashing is really fun, but it is definitely hard to control and the timing is strict as heck. Once I started to get the hang of it though, I was just constantly trying to pull it off for the rest of the game. Lastly, really small minor gripe, aiming your gun when on controller uses the left trigger and the left analog stick at the same time, meaning you can't move around while aiming, which renders the whole thing pretty useless. Not a big deal since aiming isn't exactly required very often, but it's definitely a choice. That's it for my minor criticisms of the game though. They are by no means game ruining, but I thought I'd bring them up and see what you guys think. Also, what the hell is up with this soccer game? This is freaking rigged. By the way, there is a new sequel slash spiritual successor in the works, coming out soon, hopefully, and yeah, it looks pretty cool. I'm getting major Risk of Rain 2 vibes from it, which is probably my all-time favorite roguelite, so I can say with certainty that I am definitely interested in it. I hope it turns out great. Initially, I was planning on having a section here to close out the video going over my own interpretation of the story, but after thinking it over for a few days, I think I would just be doing you guys a disservice in doing so. I much prefer that you experience it for yourselves and come up with your own interpretation. Instead, I'll just say this. I think the game's story is themed around a fear of sickness and of death that I think a lot of people can relate with. If you want to learn more about the actual story of the game though, and like the history of this world, without doing the research yourself of course, then go watch Squatch Gaming's Hyperlight Drifter's story video, which I'll leave a link to down below. It's 20 minutes long, but it felt like 2. I cannot recommend it enough. I don't know if I've done this game justice in this video. I feel like I haven't, but hey, it's the thought that counts, right? Hyperlight Drifter isn't just a game. It is art. It's a personal, imaginative, unique, and unforgettable experience. It's a masterpiece that deserves a place in your heart, not just on your shelf. Hey, so thanks a bunch for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I have a question for you watching this though. I have gotten absolutely tons of great game suggestions for me to cover on this channel over the past few months. You guys have been wonderful, thank you. But it's becoming more and more clear to me that I'll never be able to get around to talking about all of these games, even though I might like to, since making these sort of overview videos takes me a long time. So with that in mind, would any of you be interested in seeing some more first impression style videos on those games and new releases that are getting hyped? I'm thinking like I play a game for a couple hours, trim it down to the good parts, and add in a little quick-fired here's what I think about it so far type of thing at the end. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Should I just stick with the longer, more involved videos I've been doing? Let me know, I am open to suggestions. Alright, that's all I've got. See you in the next one.